critical government programs and protect our national security. President Trump has fired tens of thousands of nonpartisan federal employees, all because they carry out a function that the president simply doesn't like. And just this week, President Trump's Department of the Interior fired hundreds of workers who protect the health and safety of the Great Lakes, an economic and ecological gem for Michigan and all the states that surround those lakes. At every turn, President Trump has instituted policies that increase his power and sway so that he can more easily pick winners and losers among the federal workforce. He's made it so that only qualification for being a federal worker is someone who voted for you, whether or not you were voted for him, whether or not you actually do the job. In fact, he's taking us back to the spoils system of the 1800s. And it's not only politicizing our nonpartisan expert civil service, it's jeopardizing our government's ability to deliver crucial services to the American people. And like authoritarians in the past, President Trump doesn't want you to know about his illegal actions. So he's covering them up by undermining independent oversight at every single turn. And when it comes to picking winners and losers, we know that President Trump always chooses himself as the winner. He blatantly uses the office of the president to promote the sale of his own meme coins. He accepts large investments and gifts from foreign governments without regard for national security concerns or federal ethics laws. Meanwhile, his family and friends peddle influence and make deals to enrich themselves and the president. And what have all these efforts to enrich himself add up to? It's no surprise that his net worth has risen by $3 billion in the past year. So I'd like to ask my colleague from the great state of Oregon a question about what these decisions to basically unlawfully pick winners and losers, what do you believe that means for the future of our country?
Well, I so appreciate the point that my colleague from Michigan has been making. And if we think about the fundamental difference between a democracy and authoritarian government, one way of describing that difference is that in a democracy, elected representatives of the people, like folks who are gathered here right now, work together, bringing their diverse life experiences, their knowledge of their individual states, and together find a strategy that will address their collective challenges so that each and every part of the country is represented and things are addressed that are important to every part. That design of the programs and how they will operate and how they will fund happen in a democracy in a chamber like this. In an authoritarian system, it's all happening on the executive side. The executive is saying, here are the programs that are going to be funded. Here are my priorities and what I'll do. Here are the grants I'll cancel and the ones that I'll redirect. Here is the way we'll run these programs. And that is exactly what the Trump administration is trying to do. They are trying to move the responsibility we have under the Constitution to design programs, to decide how much they should be funded, to resolve questions about how they will operate, and move that responsibility over to the executive. And the head of Office of Management and Budget, he was very upfront about it. He said, I believe in the unitary executive, where all power rests with the president. And that means the president can cancel programs at will. And I was shocked when I heard him say this. This was before we had the hearing in the Budget Committee, probably about the same time you were holding a hearing on Russell Vogt. And I said, you know, that's already been adjudicated by the Supreme Court. There was an effort in 1996 to do a line item veto and allocate to the president the ability to say these programs go forward, these programs fail. And the Supreme Court said, hell no, you can't do that. The Constitution assigns the responsibility to the legislature to decide what gets funded, and the executive has to implement that plan. And when the question of impoundments came up at an earlier date, we're on a different strategy. Nixon said, hey, I think I'll just not forward the funding. I will impound it so certain programs won't get funded. Again, that had gone to the Supreme Court. And again, the Supreme Court said no. But Mr. Vogt sat in my office, and he said, well, I believe that we will get this issue to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will back the unitary executive, strengthen the executive powers in this country. And I just shook my head. I'm like, that can't possibly happen. But what happened just a short time ago? A piece of this went to the court, and in their shadow docket, and the question was, could the administration slow walk funding to the last 45 days of the fiscal year, then bring over a request for us to undo that funding, it's called a rescission, and then because there's a 45-day grace period pause, the fiscal year expires and the funding authorization goes poof, and suddenly the president has killed the program. And the court, on their preliminary response, said, yeah, we think you can do that. So Russell Vogt certainly seems to have a better grip on where the Supreme Court is, but I just feel like we have to do everything we can, therefore, legislatively, to stop that. Our spending bills need to say that if we have a bipartisan spending bill, that decision to undo that program can only be done by a bipartisan bill in the future, which is the way we do rescissions now. We have money that's left over from a program or this program, and we say that money can be brought back in, it's not needed, but we do it in a bipartisan manner, not in a manner that gives the power of the purse to the President of the United States. And this is a collective effort that all of our Republican and Democratic colleagues should be involved in. I mean, collectively, we need to be defending our role in the Constitution, and this is central to the separation between authoritarian power and a democracy. I've been on the Senate floor to ring the alarm bells for a long time, somewhere around 6:25 yesterday. And I want to thank people who have been here with me the whole time, people who made this happen. My team, Merkley staff, who I see a few of them, and quite a few of them are here. I'm so pleased, and I appreciate their support. The Capitol Police, who had to stay through the night. The Democrats, it's pretty cool that you were here. Every now and then when I was a little lonely, I'd look over, I'd see some heads peeking around the corner over on this side, this side. That was great. That PAGE program is extraordinary. And I hope all of you will think about how you find a path in life to build a better world. There is no better mission for a soul on this planet to find a way to build a better world. A million ways to do it. The Senate doorkeepers, thank you. So appreciate you all. Senate parliamentarians, oh my goodness. I don't know what kind of flowers I can possibly bring, but I will be in your debt for a long time. Thank you. The presiding officers. So many of my colleagues from across the aisle had to come, and I know how hard it is to sit in that chair. I did my 100 hours in that chair, plus quite a few, and I know it's awfully hard to be there and not even be able to respond when maybe someone disagrees profoundly, and yet you are here making it possible that I could carry this conversation, ringing the alarm bells about authoritarianism. Couldn't have been done if you all hadn't come and held the floor. So thank you. And all of you colleagues who came to give a little dissertation and ask a question, and sometimes a longer dissertation. And I was like, thank you, thank you. I appreciate that so much. We are in the most perilous moment, the biggest threat to our republic since the Civil War. President Trump is shredding our Constitution. Our nation has spent 250 years striving toward a vision of equal justice. Of course, we had our Declaration of Independence. It took a few years to get our Constitution that we now have in place, 1787. But we have been striving towards this vision in which everyone is empowered in this country. And I always think about how the foundation of the law is carved into the facade above the Supreme Court pillars, and it says equal justice under law. You know, the very first political act I took was when I was a junior in high school. And I read an article in the evening paper, back when there was often a business paper in the morning and a labor paper in the evening, the Oregon Journal. And the article said that Agnew, Vice President Agnew, had been convicted of bribery, convicted of taking $100,000, the article said, and he had been given a fine of $10,000. And I was like, what? For the rich and powerful, they get to keep 90% of their proceeds? So I fired off a letter to the Oregon Journal and said, this is not right in a nation that values equal justice under law. And they printed it. They're long out of business. I'd like to get a copy of that, but long out of business. But the vision Trump is putting forward is unequal injustice. It's a huge assault on the foundation for our nation. And what we have is a nation in which the founders, and many of you spoke so eloquently to this, a nation in which the founders said, we do not want to have a king. We want to have government that flows up from the people, not down from a monarch. And so they put together their best ideas. They wrestled with it at the Constitutional Convention. They went through many versions of what the Senate would look like and even what our terms would look like. At one point, 12 years. At one point, lifetime. Right now, I'm wishing it was a little less than 6 years myself. But the challenge we have is that that vision of a separation of powers, of checks and balances, is being steadily destroyed by President Trump. In the book that I was using as kind of the framework for discussing these issues, it says most people, even today, think it's still republics die with men wielding guns. And it is essential we understand that that is not the way most republics die today. Most republics die because someone is elected who starts working systematically to reduce those checks and balances. And then perhaps they're aided by a rubber stamp Congress. And perhaps they're aided by a Supreme Court that vests more power in the executive with key decisions. And of course, it takes that aggressive authoritarian personality. And we've got all three. We are fully in the authoritarian moment right now. The president believes that he is the king of this country and that he can control everything regardless of what the law says or what we send him. And we have to collectively, and it should be a bipartisan effort, collectively say, hell no. We took an oath to the Constitution, to the vision of government by and for the people, not government by and for the powerful. And we're going to keep fighting to restore that vision. And today, so many of you highlighted so many pieces of what's going wrong in our country in terms of the erosion. A president who wants to tell universities what they can teach and is using research grants over their head. A president who wants to tell law firms who they can give pro bono help to and has forced them to various firms to chuck up $1 billion to be done for pro bono work on the places, the organizations Trump wants them to spend it. A president who is using every tool available to try to get the court decisions that will allow him to use both the National Guard and the troops to be able to go where in the country he wants them domestically, even if there is no insurrection, no rebellion, and no invasion. A president who is weaponizing the judiciary to go after person after person after person, coming off his enemies list. And whoever it might be that's next, one of us may be next. One of our colleagues has certainly been publicized by Trump as being on Trump's enemies list. And this is just not to be allowed in government by and for the people. The crushing of due process, and I appreciate the comments of my colleague from Illinois about due process and all of the challenges regarding immigration and due process. And let's find a way to finally pass an immigration bill after coming so close so many times. And Senator Durbin, I know you are retiring, but let's get the immigration fix done before you leave us with all of your expertise. Your group of 8 that you put together before you did incredibly fabulous work, and this is way past due that we have that foundation of law with many of the pieces of improvements for justice. We saw on day one of this administration Trump down there in the rotunda with the billionaires standing behind him. And from that moment, it was apparent that's what his government was about, by and for the wealthy and the powerful. And if we had any doubts, then it was resolved when he put forward his version of a bill, which he called the Big Beautiful Bill, and we often called, many of us, the Big Ugly Betrayal. Because only an authoritarian president who believes that the people answer to him rather than him being accountable to the people would come up with a strategy of decimating the health care through the ACA to fund tax breaks for billionaires. Only an authoritarian president would say, let's demolish Medicaid, and between Medicaid and ACA, have 15 million people lose their health care, 235,000 projected in my state. Only an authoritarian would say, let's cut child nutrition to fund even more tax breaks for billionaires. And then, of course, on top of all that, put forward a plan that runs up $30 trillion in debt, additional debt over 30 years. Probably the most fiscally irresponsible bill ever to pass through this chamber. And that $30 trillion of additional debt will so compromise our efforts to take on the foundations for ordinary families, for health care, for housing, for education, for good-paying jobs. The 4 foundations that give a family a chance to stand on their feet and thrive. So we all have taken an oath to the Constitution. So let's all work together in every possible way to ring the alarm bells, because it is a fact that if we do not ring the alarm bells, well, the longer you are in an authoritarian state, it becomes more and more entrenched. And so we have to fight it in every possible way. I'm so proud of the 7 million Americans who took to the street in every one of our states at those 2,700 different locations all across the country to say no kings. They were ringing the alarm bells. They were saying that it is absolutely unacceptable to have an authoritarian government. And that is the largest demonstration in U.S. history. And for each one of those 7 million, they have families, they have friends who knew that they were doing this, who are becoming educated about the challenge that we're facing right now. And we have to recognize that the next election is absolutely critical if we're going to save our republic, because the strategy of an authoritarian is to rig the elections. And the more time they have, the more entrenched it becomes. And already here is Trump trying to do a national voter registration file that can be more easily manipulated for the elections next year. Here is President Trump trying to do massive gerrymandering in a whole bunch of states in order to offset the balance between Democrats and Republicans that are fairly represented in the House of Representatives. Here is President Trump saying he will do everything possible to stop the use of vote by mail across the country, because we know why. Because vote by mail has such integrity. It can't be manipulated on election day like precincts can. In precincts, you can move their location. You can put them where there's no parking. You can understaff them. The machines can break down. You can send intimidators. You can proceed to put out fake information about their location. You can put out information the election was last week when it's really this coming Tuesday. Can't do that with vote by mail. And when we have the majority, we must pass the For the People Freedom to Vote bill and lock down the integrity of our elections so we will not worry for a generation about the people having a fair voice in our government by and for the people. I'm proud to be colleagues with all of you in this effort. Thank you very much, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Recognize the Democrat leader.
Mr. President, let me express the profound gratitude of all of us for his amazing tour de force over these many hours. Jeff Merkley has been the Paul Revere of 21st century America, literally, figuratively riding from one corner of this country to the other, alerting people to the danger our democracy is in with the would-be king as president. No one has done it better. No one has done it with more persistence. No one has done it with more passion. No one has done it with more effectiveness than Jeff Merkley. Not only this Senate, but much more importantly, all of America owes you a tremendous, tremendous debt. Thank you.
I recognize the Republican whip.